In the spring of 1917, the First World War felt like it would never end. Years of brutal stalemate on the Western Front. But then, one French general steps up with a plan so bold, so confident, he promised it would end the entire war. This is the incredible story of that plan, the Nivelle Offensive. And there it is, straight from the man himself, General Robert Nivelle. Just think about that promise. Not another grueling, months-long battle for a few yards of mud. No. A war-winning breakthrough in just 2 days. He had everyone convinced. Politicians, the public. He truly believed the German army was on its last legs, ready to just collapse. So, what went wrong? Because what was supposed to be a lightning-fast victory turned into one of the most notorious disasters of the war. A failure so complete it literally broke an entire army. So let's get into it and break down how it all went so terribly wrong. Okay, so to really understand the insane level of hope that Nivelle created, we have to rewind a bit and look at the grim reality of early 1917. After the absolute meat grinders of 1916, I'm talking Verdun, the Somme, the French army was just desperate for a new direction. Morale was at rock bottom. And then in walks General Nivelle. He's charismatic, he's full of energy, and unlike all the generals before him, he's not just promising another battle. He's promising the result, the end of the war. The plan itself was just breathtaking in its omission. Here's how it was supposed to go down. First, the British would kick things off with a huge attack up at Arras. The idea was to draw all the German reserves north, away from the real target. Then, bam, the main event. Over 1 million French soldiers would smash through the German lines at a ridge called the Chemin des Dames. Once they were through, it was basically a race to the Belgian border, rolling up the entire German army along the way. This was designed to be the knockout blow, the whole shebang. But, and this is a huge but, while Nivelle was busy planning his masterpiece, the Germans weren't just sitting there in their trenches waiting for it. They were changing the rules of the game entirely. This analogy just nails it. This is the absolute core of the problem. Nivelle's whole plan was built to defeat the German army of 1916. The problem was, by the spring of 1917, that army was using a totally new, revolutionary defensive system that made Nivelle's entire strategy useless before a single shot was even fired. What's so wild is, when you look at the timeline, months before the French attacked, Germany was already putting this new playbook into action. They're publishing new defensive manuals, and then they pull off Operation Alberich, a massive, planned withdrawal to a super fortified position called the Hindenburg Line. Just that move alone freed up something like 14 divisions, which, you guessed it, they sent straight to reinforce the exact spot Nivelle was planning to hit. So let's look at how this new doctrine actually worked. The old way was pretty straightforward. You pack as many guys as you can into the front trench and just hold on for dear life. This new defense in depth was the total opposite. The front line was basically just a tripwire. The real battle was designed to be fought farther back in a deep, flexible defensive zone. The idea was to let the French attack, absorb the punch, bleed them dry, and then set them up for a killer counterattack. And that counterpunch came from these guys, the Eingriff, that's A-N-G-R-I-F-E divisions. Now, these weren't just your regular reserves. No way. These were specialist counterattack units. Their one and only job was to launch a powerful, immediate assault, a Gegenstoß, and take back any piece of ground the attackers managed to capture. They were the hammer of this new German defense. So you've got a French plan built on old intel, slamming into a German defense designed for the future. You can probably guess what happened next. It was an absolute catastrophe. The attack kicked off in this cold, miserable, rainy weather. You have over 1 million French soldiers loaded down with gear, climbing out of their trenches and moving into no man's land. But instead of finding the shattered German defenses they were promised, they walked straight into a wall of perfectly sighted machine guns and pre-planned artillery fire. The whole thing just fell apart, immediately and completely. The German machine guns, they were hidden on reverse slopes, so the French artillery couldn't even see them. That big ridge, the Chemin des Dames, it was full of these ancient stone quarries and tunnels that the Germans turned into massive bomb-proof bunkers. And those brand new French tanks that were supposed to be a game changer, most of them were knocked out before they even got close to the German lines. The result was this. Just look at that number, an estimated 187,000 French casualties. In just a few weeks, the French army lost nearly 200,000 men, killed, wounded, or missing, a casualty rate they hadn't seen since the very beginning of the war. It's just staggering. That breakthrough Nivelle promised, it never happened. The grand offensive pretty much stalled on the very first day. It just evolved into a pointless, brutal meat grinder that chewed up division after division for absolutely zero strategic gain. The promise of a quick victory was completely and utterly dead. The impact of this disaster went way beyond the battlefield. It went deep, right into the soul of the French army, and it pushed those soldiers right to their breaking point. You have to understand, for the soldiers on the ground, this was so much more than just a disappointment. It felt like a deep, personal betrayal. They felt like they had been lied to, that their lives had been thrown away for a general's fantasy. And so, starting in May, they just stopped. They began refusing orders to attack. And this crisis of morale, it spread like wildfire. At its absolute peak, nearly half of all French divisions on the Western Front were affected by these mutinies. Now, they weren't deserting. They promised they'd still defend their trenches, but they flat out refused to launch any more of these suicidal attacks. The French government had no choice. Something had to give. Nivelle was fired, and he was replaced by General Philippe Pétain, the famous hero of Verdun. The Nivelle offensive was over, but its legacy, wow, that would completely reshape French strategy for the rest of the war. What's so amazing here is just how stark the contrast is. It's night and day. Pétain basically took Nivelle's entire philosophy and threw it in the trash. He brought in a new strategy of healing and defense. He promised no more of these grand, massive offensives. From now on, it was going to be limited, methodical attacks with overwhelming artillery support to keep casualties down. And just as important, he focused on the soldiers' welfare. Better food, more reliable leave, better pay. He started to heal his broken army. But the cost of learning that lesson was just immense. I mean, the French suffered horribly, but look at the German losses, also staggering, around 163,000 men. So that new defense-in-depth strategy, it worked, but it was incredibly costly for the defenders too. In fact, it cost them so much that they couldn't launch any major attacks of their own for months. And that really brings us to the final big question, doesn't it? The offensive was, without a doubt, a tactical and strategic disaster. It was a failure born of pure arrogance that led an entire army to mutiny. But out of those ashes came a new, more realistic, and ultimately more sustainable strategy under Pétain that brought the French army back from the brink. So what was it? The catastrophic blunder that almost lost the war, or the brutal, painful lesson France had to learn in order to survive it?